Good afternoon. This afternoon we're going to be talking about some dual cover crops. Our speaker is Alex from southern Brazil. He came a long way, so he's got a lot of important stuff to tell us. He's currently at the Learning Center. He's the Learning Center agronomist at sustainability at the Bayer Water Utilization Learning Center. He received his Bachelor of Science in Agronomy from Federal University at Rio Grande do Sul, and that's in Brazil.
Yes.
And that was in 2012. A master's at University in master's degree in agronomy at Kansas State, yay, K-State, in 2016, and finally a doctor of agronomy from University of Nebraska in Lincoln. He did his postdoc at the University of Wisconsin. Been around, Alex. Good job, thank you. So he was also awarded the North Central SARE Graduate Student Grant at the University of Nebraska. His goals for the future are to keep contributing to the education of producers and students engaged to build a more sustainable agriculture. What more can we ask? Take it away. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction. All right, so basically what I want to share with you all today is a project that I developed when I was at UNL. I did for 2 years, and SARE was the grant who funded. SARE funded this project where we were trying with this idea, a new concept, which is not that common here in the state, and maybe not in the Midwest as a whole. If you go south, maybe you would see more, but basically double cropping. And I believe when we talk about double cropping and you Google it for row crops, you would say, okay, how I double crop soybeans right after wheat or something like that. But in this case, we're exploring a new way of double cropping. So we have our traditional corn and soybean system that we see in most of the state, but what we wanted with this is to bring a new alternative for farmers that want to diversify their system, not only in terms of environment, but also financially, or whoever the reason you might want to diversify, right? And in this case, we tested field peas or post-crop in general, and following by cover crops, forages, and also some short season grain crops. So I'm going to talk about, I will give a brief introduction where I talk about some examples of intensified cropping systems. Why double cropping? Then we are going to talk about the post-crop variety trial. That was the first thing we tested for the concept. Then double cropping peas. What are our options? If we grow peas, we have a good window to grow after that. A little bit of financial analysis. This is still a rough estimate, but it's good to put some numbers there. And then some final remarks where we will talk about challenges and some future research. So when I talked about intensified cropping systems, the idea here is how can we take more by not extracting. I mean, I want to talk about rotation, right? So how do we get out from our traditional corn on corn or corn on beans, or even in this example here on western Nebraska where we have winter wheat and corn and a lot of fallow ground. So first thing that I need to mention is the gradient of precipitation in the state. And you are all from, I guess, from the area. You know better than I that as we travel west, the precipitation decreases dramatically. And that's always important to mention to show the challenges that we have when we want to change things. So we need to be aware. And I had the chance to study most of my PhD in the western part of the state where a lot of limitations, mainly in water, happen. And we tried during my PhD doing an intensified cropping system where I was interested in cover crops. So if you take the rotation of winter wheat and corn, you have that fallow period after winter wheat. So we tested the concept of putting cover crops and how does that impact corn as a subsequent crop. And then a colleague of mine, he was doing his master's at the time, he was testing field peas before winter wheat. So we are going from a system with 2 fallow periods to a system where you basically don't have fallow. And going back to the challenges, our main concern was water, right, in this system. But in my side of thing, in my side where I devoted a lot of my energies on cover crops, we had a lot of good things that we thought that could benefit that rotation, right? We think that cover crops are a great resource for protecting the soil. Adding a legume crop, if you go back to the rotation, you had wheat and corn, no legumes at all growing in those fields. So by inserting cover crops or mixes, at least put a legume there to start building more nitrogen or cycle that nitrogen in the soil. Promote nutrient cycling, which is a great resource from cover crops. These pictures here, I talked about soil conservation, right? So clearly cover crops can hold that soil together. And also something that I didn't think much about, but until I run this project, is how cover crops are good on weed suppression. So it can help a lot reducing the herbicide application, or even helping in those cases to break the cycle of weeds. But at the same time, we faced some challenges when we were dealing with western Nebraska, and that was all dry land areas. With the projects that we ran out west, two things happened in a bad way. So first was the nitrogen immobilization. Here we have a picture of a cornfield, right, where the study was placed, all the cover crops, and then we had control plots where no cover crops were growing before, and you can see the difference in green, right? So basically the dark green is where the no cover crop was at, and after doing analysis, soil analysis and also leaf analysis, we saw nitrogen tied up when we had cover crops before corn. Now, next step would be, how do we mitigate that process, that stress, right? Do we need to fertilize? Do we need to put a legume crop before? What do we do? And the other challenge that was even more critical, which is hard to control, is the lack of precipitation or lack of water in the soil. And that is kind of clear in this picture. This was in 2017. It was not a great year for western Nebraska. I mean, it was pretty dry. You can see that even our control plot was not that happy, the corn. But it was even more sad when we had the late termination of cover crop. And here it is important to mention the late termination, because we were testing different management practices for cover crops in that area. We tested fall, only growing in the fall. We tested early termination, that was 3 weeks before corn, and we tested at the day of planting. So if we delay too much the termination, and that can be done either chemically or physically, roller crimper, whatever tool you prefer. If you delay too much, we could have that scenario where corn would struggle a lot, and we saw up to 20 bushels less when we had that treatment. Now, so that's more on the intensification. I mentioned a colleague of mine doing field P. He was able to get up to 30 bushels an acre for peas doing a dry land, western Nebraska. So that would be a cash crop, right? So you can sell it. Cover crops are more on that environmental services or to cycle nutrients, the benefits I mentioned. But another way to intensify is to double crop. And the reason why we want to try this concept is that diversification, I mentioned that before, but also spread financial risks that we may associate with the traditional rotation. So imagine some farmer that is doing corn after corn. If you had a bad price of corn, you just have corn to sell. So with this system, we put peas, but then we also put something else after. So you have two shots in the year to try to diversify. And also aggregate value to the land, right? We want to improve that soil. We want to promote not only soil health in general, right? Have a better conditions for future crops that we want to grow. And pretty much is keep the soil covered and harvest and plant, right? So in this case, it's very important. Every day matters. So in the same day that we harvested, we planted the double crop. So that was very key for the process. And you're going to understand why here soon. So for the double crop, we simulated a crop rotation, right? So let's say, for example, we have soybeans, then we have corn in the following year, and then in the third year we want to diversify. We can do post crops, and that can be field pea, lentils, or chickpeas, followed by either a cover crop, a forage crop for grazing, or even a short season grain crop, and that can be sorghum, that can be soybeans, that can be millet. It goes more on the preference of the farmer. Some advantages is that we keep the cash crop in the system. So if we go back to what we tested in Western Nebraska, where we were relying a lot on cover crops, here we are actually putting cash crops. So it could be more, it would be more safe financially to diversify. If we go towards the cover crop path, we have more time to grow cover crops. So imagine if a farmer is doing corn, soybeans, you have maybe 2 months at most to grow in the fall and maybe another 2 months in the spring. Here, if you do post crops or even winter wheat, as an example, we have at least 2 months more than normal, right? We would have 4 months in the fall. There is an opportunity to include the grazing component here, and it will depend which forage or when you plant it, of course, but I will show you some promising results that could be used for farmers that graze. And also, lastly, the possibility of doing a short season crop, and here it is more risky, of course, because we are in Nebraska, so temperature and early frost can be a risk when we opt for this option. So to start with, I mentioned that first part of the year, in the spring, we would do post crops, and we did two years where we had a lot of interest of farmers coming to the Eastern Nebraska Research Station down in Meade, and we tested those 3 posts, I already said, field peas, chickpeas, and lentils. The 2 trials were very similar. You don't need to read this. I will briefly talk about this. Is the protocol we run. So they were exactly the same for both years, okay? We planted early in the spring, so that would be in between March 20 and April 10, in that window, when we would put all the post crops there. There were no fertilizer application, okay? It was only seed and inoculant. That's all we did. And in 2019, we did put fungicide. That's the only difference maybe from 2018. 18, we did not spray any fungicide. That can be a downside of post crops, especially in a, let's say, more wet environment. You may have some diseases that can affect, and it will also depend on the variety. So we decided to spray just to take the component out. And we harvested in both years. One year was July 12, the other year was July 14, I think. Or, no, sorry, July 10, July 11, and July 12. So it was pretty consistent on that end when we harvested post crops. And we tested around 28 varieties of peas, yellow peas, around 10 of green peas, and here I have a summary of how much we got in 2018. We had an average of 38 bushels an acre on 2018 for peas. The range would be more 22 to 48 if you would take all the varieties. So we were happy. We expected more because that's kind of the yields that we were getting in Western Nebraska. So we would expect more for Lincoln area, Eastern Nebraska, right? But then as we come to 2019, and there is a lot of factors playing here, not only the weather, but the soil type. We grew in a different land. It's in the same territory, but different piece of land. And then we jumped and we basically doubled those yields. We got on the 70s for peas. Really good crop. He had that fungicide application that helped it in the same way. But for chickpeas and lentils, we didn't have much of variability from year to year, I would say. So lentils, let's see, we had around 30 and around 20, 25 for both years, and chickpeas more on the 40s. Now, it's important to show you this, how the weather behaved, so we can kind of design the scenario for a double crop, right? And basically, in both years, we had an early, our first frost event in the first week of October. So that's very important to consider if you want a double crop, right? And the main differences on those 2 years were the spring in 2019 was quite wet. If I'm not mistaken, is when we had the floods. But in temperature-wise, they were quite similar. So pretty much the wet spring in 2019, if you compare those 2 years, which could have helped peas to grow more. And at the harvest time was drier in 19, which also helps for that yield. So we harvested peas early July, right? Now what can we do after? We have most of July, August, September, October, let's say those 3 months, let's put it this way. We have 3 months to do something to grow after the post crops. And the options that we chose for the project were, okay, we are in an area of corn and soybeans, so we should test corn, right? So we had this corn variety of 72 days to reach maturity. Soybeans, we tested 2.0, 1.6, and 1.0 mg. Grain sorghum, sunflowers, proso, and pearl millet. And then forage sorghum, that would be more of course, a forage, should be down here, with Sudan grass, and 2 cover crop cocktails, or mixes. One that is winter sensitive with 10 species, and another one as a winter hardy with close to 13 species. And this is how they look like. I have this mosaic from 2018. 19 was similar in terms of how they developed it, but we planted on July 12th, okay? And this top part is August 1st, 20 days after planting. And then we have corn, sunflower, sorghum, soybean, millet, and sorghum. So they had a really good start. And then by October 19, after the first frost event, maybe a week after, that's 97 days after planting, they were all already brown, kind of, okay, there is no more growth, there is no more translocation of nutrients in the plant for grain-wise. And that's how they look like. You will ask me, okay, did all of them make to yield? They did, but not all of them made to maturity, right? So corn, we didn't get much, and I'm gonna talk about that. Let me jump to what we did in terms of measurements. We did measure water in the soil, and this was from 1 to 4 feet depth. We did some biomass and forage quality, soil sampling, where we were interested to see the dynamics of nutrients after this rotation, and finally grain yield. So when we talk about yields, okay, and here in the table on the top we have 2018, and in the bottom 2019 grain yields. For the forages, this is all forages and cover crops. We were really impressed by the first year, which is quite surprising that we could have, especially for Sudan grass and forage sorghum, close to 10,000 pounds an acre, 7 for Sudan grass and 11 for forage sorghum. And there was a big difference for 2019 where we didn't have much. And I will have to look back on my weather data to see if we had a drier fall. But basically, the cover crop part was more consistent. We reached roughly 3,000 pounds an acre of dry biomass for cover crops, which is a pretty good coverage for September, in the month of September, basically. This is how they were looking like at early September, or actually, this is August, sorry. This is mid to late August. This is by mid-September, where the forage sorghum was quite big. Very good size of radishes here that we noticed in September too. You can see the head and how the radishes were big. So that's why we reinforce there is a good opportunity for grazing with this type of rotation. Now, in terms of grain crops, we were not successful for corn and beans. So if we are, well, mostly corn. In beans, we can debate, but it's still not feasible, I guess, in terms of economically, right? But basically, what what we can take from these tables is that sunflower, it may help, it may work, but in 18 we had frost killed, they were frost killed. But grain sorghum and millet were two grain crops that could be done in that scenario. In 18 we had 96 bushels an acre for sorghum, in 19 close to 70. So grain sorghum is a good option after peas. And you would keep the rotation in terms of legume crop and then a grass. Now, soybeans, I say it's controversial because it's a bit risky, I would say. Maybe 1.6 is our MG that mostly worked, but still we just got 20 bushels an acre, so that would be quite risky. And this is how corn was looking like, the very small years. We had a lot of pressure of insects, and that's something to watch on those double cropping. Beans, some of them, of course, they were frost killed, so you would see a lot of green grains. But millet and sorghum, we did reach physiological maturity at the time that we got the first frost. This is how the beans were compared to our regular season. So we had an adjacent field with 2.5 ready to harvest. This was in, if I'm not mistaken, late September. 1.6, like I said, was our best shot. 1.0 was mature, but it would flower too small, so the 1.6 with maybe more pods would compensate or would overcome those yields. Now, for soils, we did a series of analyses, like looking at different components such as pH, organic matter, soil respiration, nitrogen, nitrate profile, and nitrate topsoil. There are others that we look at that. Those are the ones that I chose to present, basically, to see some differences between the treatments. And I would highlight the soil respiration. It's important to say that this is 1 year of study, so this was only for 2018. And for soil respiration, we see an increment when we had Sudan grass, right? Because you remember the biomass of Sudan grass was 5 and 10 tons, basically, per acre. And that biomass indeed increased the soil respiration. But at the same time that increased the respiration, so you are adding more carbon, you are decreasing nitrogen in the system. And that can be viewed as good if you think about that is cycling, is tidying up, you decrease your losses in terms of leaching, but also can be a problem for your future crop in the next year. It need to be, of course, investigated if that can translate to a tied up for a corn crop if you do in the following year. But basically, all the crops that produced a high amount of residue, they reduce the topsoil nitrate, which is something that we expected. So soil respiration, more residue, more soil respiration, but less nitrate. And here is just a figure to visualize when we separate the crops in forages and cover crops, right? You have one group, and that's the pink reddish color here, and then you have grain crops, which is in the blue area here. And this is just a diagram of an analysis that we did, and then we have all the variables kind of going towards one of those two groups. And then we could see by grouping that for forage crops, we see more of organic carbon going towards them. Soil health is kind of in the middle, but basically the ammonium and carbon. Now for grain crops, the profile nitrate, because they don't use quite as much, at least that's what we figured, and organic matter, because, well, organic matter, it takes time to see true results. But basically nitrogen going towards grain crops, and that's what we presented before, and carbon going towards forages and cover crops. And we also measured, I'm sorry, it's a little small, but I will go through. We also measured the following corn grain crop. So we had the rotation, and then in the following year, we measured the yields of corn that were after each of those plots. And then was quite interesting to see, and then you have corn grain yield, of course, and also the treatments here in the bottom. It was interesting. The first year in 2018, or that would be 19, right after the 18 season, we didn't see much difference on the corn grain yield, right? It was from 205 to 236. If you run a stats, it probably won't catch a difference. Actually didn't, I ran. But then in 19, or the 2020 corn crop, we did see some more of a change, right? Because we have from 2000 or 219 all the way down to 186. So it can go 40 bushels on or almost that in some cases. And so that's something to watch for, right? When we double crop, see what the next year yield would be. This can be related to water, to nitrogen. I would say maybe more water, but it's things to watch when you introduce a new crop to the system. Then these numbers of financial analysis, they are outdated. I know they can be variable. Each year will be different, but we did run at the time. So just to have an idea how much income we could have with each crop or with each combination of crops. So then we had a few numbers. We put the yields that we got in the first year. And basically this table kind of summarizes, we have in gray in the bottom what a year of corn, this is just the gross income, okay, just yield times price. And then a soybean crop, and then we compare with all the different combinations that we had in the system. All the field peas, lentils, and chickpeas, plus whatever crop was grown following that post-crop. And then everything you see in green here, we saw a gross income above the traditional corn or soybeans. And then in red or orange would be what we had below. And probably it went below because corn and soybeans, we didn't have much yield, and millet, the price was low. But then everything else, if you combine the biomass, and it's just estimations, or grains, you could overcome or at least tied up with either corn or soybean growing in the area. So the next step for this trial, basically, we would evaluate a grazing component, what gain weight we could have if we introduce cows. Sorry. Quality analysis of those forages, what can we expect by having such a high amount of biomass, how much we can take advantage of it. And profitability, right? Run those numbers, put the costs. If I have to tell you costs besides seeds would be labor, some herbicide or fungicide application, but for fertility-wise, unless you are really struggling from already with corn and beans, if you have a high productive area like this one, you probably don't need to put fertilizer on that first year, especially before post crops. But definitely you would have to make an analysis to see if you need to compensate for the following year. The challenges that we faced with this project, okay, we are testing a concept, like I said, was pure research here. From here, what we have to validate this, there is a lot of steps. It would not happen if people don't try, and we have, of course, insurance for it. Varieties, we need to explore which varieties would do a better job in terms of can we plant early post crops and then harvest early and then have more time to double crop. Maybe that can be an option. Or maybe we can do that and also, I don't know, terminate the crop. It depends on what strategy you want to choose or what direction you want to go. It would be really good to have a marketing for pulses. I know North Dakota, Montana, Canada, they are way ahead in those terms. I see a potential for this market in Nebraska, but it needs that goes to a farmer association more interested in expand this to to promote these crops. Maybe it was a little fast, but give us some time to discuss and questions. I appreciate. Thank you very much for your time to listen to this presentation. Yes.
Alexandre, this is really interesting stuff because we're all looking for more diversification in the panhandle, of course. I know there's been a lot of research on Rosso, but not so much on other millets. Some on pearl millet. What about other crops beyond the ones you did, such as amaranth, quinoa, what else? Teff, for example. 30 years ago, we had a guy from Ethiopia working on teff out there. Have you looked at any of these as possibilities?
So the question is, what other possibilities for crop to double crop in this system? I guess here we can be creative, but at the same time trying to validate, see if we have time to grow them. I'm not familiar with the ones that you said, like maybe quinoa, I already saw it. But definitely could, if we choose a crop that can grow in 90 days. I know in Brazil we do a lot of double cropping. It's a completely different scenario, right? But dry beans is a possibility that we do in Brazil after either corn or soybeans, or because sometimes you also don't have too much time for double cropping, so beans are very handy to grow in 90 days, or pinto beans, black beans, But yeah, I think it depends on your interest in how much time you have to, and weather-wise, to do it.
I was a little surprised by the corn versus sorghum yields because we had sorghum plots out there for quite a few years in the 1980s, and the farm manager at High Plains Lab would always plant corn at about 6,000 plants per acre, huge spacing, and he would always beat the sorghum every year. It was very discouraging.
Right. Yeah, that was in Sydney, you said?
Yeah.
HPAL? Yeah, I had a study there. It was 15,000 plants an acre, I think was the density for corn. And
pushed it right down to like 5,000 or 6,000 plants. Huge spacing.
yeah, and still beat the sorghum. Yeah.
So that's because of the flowering and the cool nights really soft. They really soft for the sorghum.
Yeah, and they're good for corn.
And,
Yeah.
and corn is fine.
Yeah.
The sorghum would look great in August. Then you go out about 2 weeks later in the middle of September, and it looked exactly the same because of the cool nights.
Yeah, because of the cool nights just shut it down.
Yeah.
So but that's also the privilege of growing corn in Nebraska, because we end up with tremendous corns for food grade and popcorn. So the trade-off is crappy feed or excellent food corns. And a secondary question, I'm an agronomist, and I tend to work in the organic world. So we think we know what we're doing, and we get the seed, and then Mother Nature does something, and all of a sudden we are past, I'm going to call it normal deadlines for planting. And I get a call that says, well, what are my options with 72 days left in normal growing? I say, well, are you an optimist that you can have an extended season, or do you just want it down and dirty right now? I'm open for suggestions for that next crop. I mean, we understand several things, but I'm always looking for some way to help this guy who's going to take it in the shorts financially.
Yeah.
So these data you showed, was that from NRAC?
Yes, the data is from NREC. Yes. And hopefully this year we'll have it all finished up. I mean, it's basically the financial part that we need to dig through. I mean, the yields are done, the soils part is done, so we wanna put numbers to see if it's on average, maybe take an average of 5 years of prices or 10, see what we can do, options, right?
We tried some field peas, not as a double crop, just as a single crop, but early, and it worked really well, except it didn't rain. And so that was, the trunk, and it just took care of everything. We're not completely done with it, but we're pretty disappointed. So we're thinking of trying something different this year. using soybeans, but instead of putting, and we'll probably drill them, and we'll drill them with maybe winter wheat.
Mm.
And in the spring, the idea would be that the wheat and the beet and the beans would be growing, and there should be enough to compete against the weeds. And then, of course, about June, July, the wheat should die. And then the beans would come on through.
Mm-hmm.
Throwing that out as an idea. Well, what do you think?
So you would plant beans and wheat at the same time?
Soybeans and wheat.
And wheat.
Winter wheat. Or we could use rye.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is, and a friend of mine tried this many, many years ago to establish alfalfa. And he put the alfalfa and the winter wheat, and then come July, the wheat went away. And they never put on seed, he never did anything, of course, because it's winter wheat.
Mm-hmm.
And then the alfalfa came on through. And
Mm-hmm.
again, we're using the wheat as a suppressor, a wheat
Yep.
suppressor.
But then you expect to get something out of the wheat, or just as a cover? Okay. Just a cover.
Just a weed suppressor is all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. All you need is canopy, right? Canopy to fight weeds.
Right, we want some canopy, and
Yeah.
it's gonna take some moisture for us.
Yeah.
And right now, it doesn't look too promising, because we don't have any moisture in the ground at all, for wheat or for beans. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Here you have the two scenarios, right? Dry land and irrigated, right? It's completely different farming practices there.
So how did you establish yours?
So we actually drilled the beans after peas. All of them were drilled, just the corn and sunflowers we planted. But we drilled beans as a double crop.
And that was so then you didn't have any weed problem because you used herbicide?
We didn't, no, so we didn't apply herbicide for the double crop part.
Oh, okay.
I guess, so July, the canopy that field pea had, it's like a mat, right? You probably know, you agree with. So that, we didn't have any weeds below.
That late finding would give you some of that.
Yeah, so we didn't have to spray anything. Now, we tested that in the Learning Center last year, where we had to spray because we did after wheat, so a lot of the volunteer wheat was coming. So then we had to spray. But volunteer peas, there were one here and there, we could get by. Yeah.
Or we can always screen out farm.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Gary probably remembers results, but the USDA had trials up at NREC, Mead, some years ago, maybe in the 80s or so, when Jim Power planted a whole bunch of different legumes after wheat, different dates. And believe it or not, soybeans is the best forage producer
That's forage.
if there's rain, if there's enough rain.
Right.
Do you remember the results on that?
No, I should have.
It's a bulletin out of USDA.
Did
Sometime in the 1980s by Jim Power and whoever his technician was.
Did he try peas after wheat as well, or just, well, peas are cool season, they wouldn't
Yeah.
make it, but
Yeah, they were mostly, short season soybeans, but,
soybeans,
yeah, a whole range of different cover crops, legumes.
legumes, veg, and
But the soybeans were amazingly good for, just as a cover crop.
yeah, they work as well. Yeah, any crop can be a cover crop, right? Yeah, pretty much. You just don't want to do cover crops as weeds, like weed, or one become the other, right? But just need to be wise. Even in rye, that is quite common. If you don't manage well, can become a weed in your system.
So did you check any, like on your cover crops, did you take any quality, everyone had, like, you just say 4,000 pounds or 2,000, I mean, as far as like the protein or any of that?
I have that data. Yeah, we do have. I just don't have it here. But yeah, we did ran some analysis for quality. But we were really happy with the biomass amount that we could grow in 2 months, basically, like
Right.
from July to mid-September. I'm not a specialist on the animal part, but I'm sure there is a lot of that advantage.
They did some at NRAC and then Rogers Farm and then down in Maucana last 3 or 4 years, and usually planting it around Well, the earliest is about the mid-July. And, I think that, well, last year was our best, I mean, the year 2020. And it was just ideal conditions, it rained right after we planted. And we got up to, 8,000 pounds. It was like a 14 ring mix or 10.
Mm-hmm. Winter sensitive one, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because then you don't need to terminate, man. I mean, the winter will do it. Yeah.
A lot of biomass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was impressed that we put 10, 13 species, and when we collected, we could see all of them growing there. So that was cool to see.
Congratulations, this is really useful research for the panhandle.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be happy to see if someone could continue in Eastern Nebraska. I'm not there anymore, but there is things to explore here. There are some things.
It's also a huge extension job because everybody knows that cover crops use water, right?
Yes.
Too much water, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
farmers are really leery.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the downside, absolutely.
I hope they're gonna have a new soil health specialist to do that.
Yeah.
We're interviewing next week or the week after.
Yeah.
Where are you going next?
Oh, I'm with Bayer now. I'm doing the.
Where's that located?
It's in Gothenburg.
Oh, okay.
So I will be doing more of the sustainability protocols with cover crops and reduced tillage practices. Yeah.
Not necessarily chemical free.
It can be, but not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah. You have a question? Sorry.
No, I was wondering, the earliest data on cover crops that I could find on literature review, and this was 10 years ago, no, it was 20 years ago, was that it did take too much water, but what they were always doing was using just one species as a cover crop. And I think based on that North Dakota ARS information, where the more complex the makeup of the cover crop, things look better. And what I'm wondering is, how many years did you do this, 2 or 3?
So this was technically 1 because we didn't repeat in the same area. So the impact of the rotation was in 1 year.
Okay, well, I think that's the other thing that's probably important, is that these kinds of experiments are not determined in 1 year.
Yeah, I agree.
And not only that, I think there should be a minimum of 10 and probably 20.
Yeah.
Because it seems like every time you change something, whether it's a tillage practice or whether it's an agronomic practice, there's a time period where things are trying to come to equilibrium, and as a result, that's not achieved. I don't think that first year, and probably not even the 4th or 5th year yet.
Mm-hmm. Especially talking about soils, right?
Yes.
Because things that we notice in the first year that it can happen for our benefit is like weed suppression, because it's canopy, right? Basically, you're building a canopy. Some people see more beneficial insects, arthropods, when you have that green bridge between crops. But yeah, I'm with you, like soils, water, that takes time to things to rearrange in the ecosystem, right? It's not from night to day.
I know Jeffrey McMeekin is an entomologist, and do a lot of research with it. Well, he spoke down at St. Joe, Missouri about some of the research that his graduate student was doing with the insects, but there was so many positive, beneficial insects. The numbers were really good in the cover crops, and mostly the rye. And
Yeah.
the finalized.
Yeah.
I mean, every once in a while, we get that stem May, green freeze thing, that, I mean, that still can happen, but beneficials was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, just looking at biomass doesn't really analyze the whole
Right.
system. for sure.
Yeah. It's just because it's the easiest way, right, to measure something. But I agree. There is way more, right? What about the roots that we are growing in the soil, right?
We do what we know how to do.
Yeah.
But Paul,
Or the price, yeah.
Paul
Expensive.
mentioned multi-species cover crop mixtures. Of course, we've been pushing that for years. The data don't come out too well. I mean, Dr. Kohler Cole has been working on these for several years and through her PhD and afterwards. And rye just seems to dominate everything, no matter what you put in the mixture.
Yeah.
In eastern Nebraska, at least.
I saw the same in Western.
Yeah.
So you would put 4 species, and then you come back in the spring, and it's only rye there. So all the legumes that we intended to grow, rye just take over.
So like Strawley's work, you didn't even get data on most of the legumes, because there was zero.
Zero. Yeah, yeah.
I think we're lucky to have rye though, because it's so incredibly tough. I mean, you can sow that in December, and it'll still produce something.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That the ability to germ at 34 degrees is just incredible.
It doesn't seem to go too well when you plant too early.
Right.
From my
You'll be suppressed by your brassicas.
yeah.
I mean, we got a project down in Nemaha County, is one of the soil health projects. And you can tell that we have the oats and, we have the oats and the brassicas, and then we have the rye and that. And the oats are compete really well with the brassicas. But it just looks like you can't even see the rye
Yeah.
until the next spring.
Yeah. That's what I saw on some of my
And I was
trials.
planting like August 1.
Yeah. Yeah. If you do too early, right, it doesn't seem to perform very well. Then it's better to go with oats.
So we took some soil probe. We found rye roots down 7 feet, 6 feet 10 inches. The next spring, planting them like on Labor Day. And then the next spring, April 15th, we went down with the soil probe at the base. We found live rye roots down 6 feet 10 inches.
Wow.
So they do that during the winter.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, that reacts almost like a warm season grass in the first year or two of producing roots. And then you finally see the above ground growth.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's an amazing plant.
It's good that like you said, it's good that we have it.
Yeah.
Help us out. And I agree. We ideally want to see this 10 years, see what really happens in the soil. Long-term studies, just like when we were talking about conventional versus no-till, right? You wouldn't see a difference in 1 year
Right.
when you come from a conventional.
Exactly. Most of the new systems are not as good as what you have on the tillage thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.